Yeah. Yeah. Top of the top, top of the top, top of the top, man. Day3, Ynw MELLY. You heard me. Murder trial, man. Let's get into this, man. What the hell?
Can you take a look at state?
All right, man. Shout out to everybody in the chat, man. Please, 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 please do me a solid. Smash that like one time for the Snow Gang, and No Gang. You dig? Day3, I appreciate everybody pulling up, man. You know, this ain't no short process, man. So shout out to everybody that's tapped in with the tap ins. You dig? Yeah, that's basically it, man. Like, comment, subscribe, notification, all that, man. Let's get to it, man.
It's WW for identification purposes only. Do you recognize this?
Yes, it's a flash drive.
Okay, have you had an opportunity to review the flash drive?
Yes, I did.
And does it contain the video surveillance from the Isles at Sunset Lakes apartment, specifically the 40th Street guard gate?
Yes, it does.
And based on your experience and your time there,
I'm sorry.
what page?
Can we approach?
Yeah, said yes.
Oh, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Thank you.
Yes, no problem.
So I think I was saying, have you had an opportunity to review the video surveillance on the flash drive?
Yes.
Does that fairly and accurately depict the Sunset Lakes guard gate, specifically the area covering that 40th Street entrance? Your Honor, at this time, the state moves into evidence that was pre-marked. The state's WW is the state's next numbered exhibit.
Is there any objection?
No.
It be admitted.
And permission to publish?
Smart, yes, ma'am, you may publish.
States WW, we mark states 47.
I'm sorry. Can you all see the screen?
Shout out to everybody to chin at, man. Chinny. Back, man. Back at it, man. Another day. You hear me? Another day, man. Like, comment, subscribe, the notification bell, man. All that. You dig? It's good.
Why don't you have a seat up front here? How about that?
Yeah. Where?
Right up in the front
Oh,
row.
yeah, that would be great. opposite. Your Honor, nothing further for this witness.
Thank you. Is there any cross-examination?
One question. May I do it from here, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Could you tell in that video how many people were in that vehicle that we just played?
So the driver, I can't see it.
So you don't know if there were 4 or 5 people in that car, correct? Thank you very much.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Is this witness excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very good. Thank you very much. You may step down. You're excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Counsel, will call you next week.
George Bella.
Mr. Bello, please. Bello, welcome. Please remain standing for a bit. Raise your right hand and be sworn.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony which you give in this case to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your full legal name for the record.
My name is George Bello.
Please spell your first and last name for the court reporter.
It's JORGEBELLO.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Thank you.
Bello, that microphone will adjust up or down, but not back and forth.
Okay, no problem.
With your permission, Your Honor?
You ready? You may proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Bello. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Very well. Thank you for asking. Could you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury where you work?
I'm the Crime Lab Unit Manager in the Fireman Tool Mark Unit for Broward Sheriff's Office Crime Lab.
What does that mean?
Basically, it means that I examine known and unknown tool marks to determine whether or not they came from a common source, along with, of course, as I'm a manager, I manage and maintain the standard operating procedures as well as training for any new members of the lab.
How long have you been the manager of the Broward Sheriff's Office Fire and Arms and Tool Mark section?
I've been the manager there for about 6.5 years.
Prior to being the manager for in the Broward Sheriff's Office Crime Lab, where else have you worked?
I was a criminalist in the Fireman Tool Mark Unit for Miami-Dade Police Department Crime Lab.
And how long were you a criminalist there?
Approximately 7 years.
How long in total have you been working with firearms in this discipline?
So in this I've been for a total about 13.5 years.
Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what type of background and education you have?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Marine Biology, which I received from Florida International University.
And when did you graduate from Florida International University?
Good question. I think it was probably about 2009, 2010, somewhere around there.
July of 2009, sound correct?
Yeah.
Would that be reflected on your CV?
Yes.
If you need to refer to that at any point, please let me know.
Okay, will do.
Have you memorized every single training you've ever taken, date and time?
No.
Okay.
No, certainly not.
So if you could tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, after you graduated in 2009 with your Bachelor of Science in Marine Biology, what was the next steps you took in training and education specific to your current employment?
So training in the Fireman Tool Mark discipline primarily occurs at labs. It's usually on-the-job training. The main reason for that is universities are gun-free zones, and so it would be a very difficult task to try to get an education in firearms on a university campus. So the training program at Miami-Dade is a 2-year training program. It's the same in Broward Sheriff's Office. It revolves around a training manual, and that manual is comprised of several different modules that we have to complete. Some of the modules in that training manual include history of firearms design, modern firearm design, history of ammunition development, orientation, instrumentation, ethics, firearm.
Shout out to everybody in the chat, man. Top of the top, top of the TO, man. Good morning, another good morning for my good people. Shout out to the Snow Gang, man. We back in this thing, you hear me? Up and early, man. Shout out to everybody at work right now. Shout out to everybody in the crib just cooling. Shout out to everybody laying in the bed. Shout out to everybody cleaning the house, you dig? We in here, man. We gonna rock out. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Smash that like button one time for the gang. You dig? And if you did, I appreciate that. Straight up.
Comparisons, tool-mark comparisons, distance determinations, serial number restoration, and many other modules. Learning throughout that program is measured by giving technical presentations as well as writing technical papers. I also will take written examinations, oral exams, culminating eventually in a competency test to determine whether or not I can physically do the work, and then a mock trial as well as testimony training. In addition to that in-house training, I also receive training outside the laboratory in order to fulfill my job duties. Some of the different trainings I received included training in factory tours and armorers courses. And factory tours are really important for firearms examiners because they allow us to see how the integral parts of a firearm are made. So those are the parts that leave individual and identifiable marks on casings and projectiles. So some of those parts that we can observe being made are the barrel, firing pins, extractors, ejectors, magazines, magazine lips. And so we can see how all of those parts are manufactured at different manufacturers and see how the individual marks are imparted onto the tools themselves. And then the armorers courses work hand in hand with that in that they show us how all of those parts work together inside of an actual firearm.
What's good, y'all? What's up,
So
Immortal?
during the armorers course, we'll strip down the firearm down to its screws and basic components and then reassemble it and do that several times. In that process, we can see how those parts work together to leave the marks on casings and projectiles. So the factory tours show us how the marks go from the manufacturer onto the guns, and then the armorers courses can show us how the guns leave the marks on the casings and projectiles.
Okay, that's a lot of information, so let's slow down and come back a little bit. Okay, so you
So basically, this guy right here, this guy is a criminologist, which he said he studied how the gun. He said we study how the gun leaves certain marks that are unseen by the eye, like abnormal marks that it leaves and shit. So this guy just actually pretty much knows a lot about everything when it comes to guns and crime and all type of exotic shit that we about to find out.
talked about touring various gun manufacturers.
Yes.
Approximately how many times have you done that in the course of your employment as a firearms toolmark examiner?
I believe I've toured somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to somewhere between 12 and 15 manufacturers.
Is this a visitor's tour or is this a hands-on technical evaluation?
No, it's a technical tour. Firearms manufacturers are very particular, so they don't let just anybody, if you're not involved with law enforcement, specifically really firearms examiners, they don't let you through the door to take a tour. And so typically the ones that are giving the tour are like chief of engineering or something like that, where they know how each of those components are being made and where they're being made. And then because these factories are fairly large, and so when you're touring them, I don't necessarily need to see assembly. I don't necessarily need to see when they're manufacturing a slide. Those parts that don't make marks on cases and projectiles are really not important for us. And so they know, because we're in communication with them, the parts that we need to see manufactured and the information that we ask them, they have to be able to know what the answers are as well. So just somebody who's hired to operate a machine may not know some of the details that I'm going to ask. So it is a very specific tour.
So on the armorer's course, are those specific to each individual brand or make and model of firearm?
Yes, so specific to really the make and model of the firearm. So the armorer's courses, like let's say the Glock armorer's course, will teach you how to disassemble, reassemble Glock pistols. They also teach you how to fix Glock pistols. So that's kind of an added component for us. If we receive a firearm that is broken, we know how to put it back together because we've been to the armorer's courses. But they are specific. So if you take a Smith & Wesson armorer's course, Smith & Wesson makes a lot of different firearms. They don't just make pistols, they make revolvers, they make rifles, and so they have revolver armorer's courses, they have pistol armorer's courses, they have rifle armorer's courses. And so in order to be an armorer in each of those, you would have to take an armorer's course for each of those categories.
In terms of the number of armor courses that you've taken, can you please give an approximate number to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
It's probably in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 armorer's courses.
On your daily, day-to-day job, how many times do you handle a firearm?
Every day. Pretty much every day that I come into the office, I handle a firearm of some sort or another.
And is it one a day?
It can vary. So sometimes if a case has enough fired evidence, I may shoot one firearm for that particular case and then make comparisons. But if it's a day where I'm coming in and just test firing firearms, I might test fire anywhere between 75 and 100 in that particular day. So it kind of varies by the time.
So this nigga deal with guns, handle guns every day. This nigga say he tests 75 to 100. What the fuck?
That I'm performing any given day. So it'll be anywhere from 1 to, I'll say, 100.
In a single day for firearms?
Yes.
And is that for the entirety of the 13 and a half years you've worked in firearms?
Yes, minus the 2 years of training. So approximately 11 and a half years of handling a firearm every day.
In terms of the services that you can provide and do at the lab, is there a service called a distance or range of fire determination?
Yes.
Is that something that you've had training and experience in?
Yes.
Could you please tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury your training that you have in range of fire or distance determination?
So the distance determination training is primarily in-house because it's comprised of several different parts of firearms examiner training. So in order to perform distance determinations, typically we're going to need a firearm and some kind of fired evidence tying evidence to the firearm or tying the firearm to the scene. The reason for that is that distance determination, when chemically processed, is a destructive examination that can only be done one time. So if I process, let's say a sweater or a shirt for distance determination, I can only do that one time. And so we want to make sure that when we're doing it with the firearm that was found at the scene, because if not, then we're applying so many variables that we can't account for when giving a distance. And so the training is really based off of the FBI gunpowder, gunshot residue training course. And it's essentially a compilation of articles that we go through and read them. We practice making the chemicals that are required for making the test paper, the chemicals that are required for making all of the spray solutions that we would use to chemically process the garments, as well as training in using.
So this guy right here is about to prove whether this what I'm thinking. The whole close range shooting they were saying, like in the back seat with Ynw MELLY and I forgot who was in the back seat. I think it was Juvie. I can't remember. Well, yeah, they about to get him to prove that the range, how close. I'm pretty sure, and probably with the outside bullets too.
Infrared microscopy and different light microscopy to try to see gunpowder on different pattern of clothing. Once we've completed that training, it culminates, of course, in doing 10 practice exercises and then eventually a competency test to make sure that we can arrive at a known answer that an instructor gave.
Okay, so Mr. Butler, to go back, you said that you can do chemical testing. You mentioned like a sweater.
Yes.
And you said it's destructive.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So the reaction that we're looking for when we do distance determination is a chromophoric reaction, so it's a colored reaction. Burnt gunpowder reacts, or the nitrites in burnt gunpowder react with the chemicals that we're using to give an orange reaction. That reaction will only happen that one time. So if I processed it again, it wouldn't react again because those chemicals are no longer present.
So, Mr. Bello, can you do that on a human body?
No, you cannot chemically process a human body. Right.
And how long has the Broward Sheriff's Office lab been doing this process of the chemical determination of distance determination?
I believe it's been done since its induction. So I believe somewhere in the late 60s is when they started doing it.
And specifically at the Broward Sheriff's Office, when did you guys onboard this procedure?
So we've been doing it, at least since I've been there, we've been able to do it.
Hey, shout out to everybody that's pulling in late, man. Smash that like, smash that like, smash the like, man. We in day 3 of the Ynw MELLY trail. This is the gun specialists, I guess if you want to call them, the gun specialists. So the prosecution going to use them basically to prove things that they want to look or to be true about the gun to the jury. So
did have a brief hiatus when I was
bad.
hired. The firearm and tool mark unit was shut down because all of its previous examiners had retired or left, and so we had to shut down for about a year. And then when we started doing examinations again, we started offering the full range of examinations.
And when you say you had to shut down for a year, why is that?
We didn't have anybody to actually do the work, so we could have received the evidence, but it would have sat around for that entire time frame because nobody could do the work.
You were there, why couldn't you do the work?
Well, I was hired afterwards. Yeah, so I was hired after the examiners had left. And anytime you hire somebody, even if they're trained.
No, they don't have the gun, I don't believe. But they're going to use him to prove that there was an actual gun used. That's. I know it sounds stupid, but yeah, that's how they do.
In the laboratory, they have to be onboarded. So that onboarding process does include doing casework. So any casework that I was authorized to do before in Miami-Dade, I had to redo. So the quality assurance manager and the lab director gave me tests when I was onboarded, and I had to pass the test. So I had to come to the known conclusions that another examiner already knew the answer was, in order to be able to do the same examination at Broward Sheriff's Office.
Okay, so you were certified to do the examinations in Dade County.
Authorized. So I was authorized by Miami-Dade to do that at Miami-Dade County, yes.
And that authorization, how long does it last for?
Typically it's for my employment unless there's some kind of lapse. So if part of the authorization or part of the requirement for authorization is competency testing. And so if there's a
Hey, Kenny, hold on. What's your name is? Hold on. You're going to be the first nigga to get it today. Kenny Clark the Owl. DT, get that motherfucker out of here. Come here and tell me somebody shut the fuck up. Nigga, we reacting to this shit, nigga. I'm over here giving insight and we all breaking it down, nigga. I'm gonna gotta shut the fuck up, goddammit. Come here and tell me what the fuck to do. What the fuck is wrong with y'all niggas, man? Y'all niggas would never say no shit like this to a nigga, bro. Nigga smack the fuck out you, bro. You come in here, you fucking close the door quietly, sit the fuck down and join the fucking show with everybody else, motherfucker. See, it's always one rude motherfucker. Hey man, so you tell the test. I know what the fuck I'm doing, nigga. We breaking it down. We looking at it objectively and looking and getting our own shit, nigga. We not just stealing the content, nigga. God damn, bro. That nigga up out of here, bro. This is today. This is live, y'all. My fault though, this dumbass nigga.
lapse, I'm sorry, proficiency
What's wrong with this nigga, bro?
If there's a lapse in my proficiency testing and I don't complete casework in that particular field,
Be quiet and shit.
I
You be quiet, bitch.
by the laboratory to do that work.
What you talking about?
Is there a difference between
the fuck, nigga.
authorization and being certified in the field of firearms tool marks examiners?
Yes, so by definition, laboratories can authorize you to do work. They don't certify you to do work. A certification implies that
Point
there's
back black, motherfucker.
third party, right? Another body outside of your employer that's giving you some kind of standardized test. And so there is certification in distance determination, in firearms comparison analysis, and tool marks that's offered by the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners. So that would be the certification. It's a test that was made by experts to be challenging. And so when you pass that, you've passed a standard test that everyone who's certified in that field passed. Authorizations are subjective in that they're designed and implemented by individual laboratories. So that's saying, an authorization is saying you can do that test in that laboratory. So if you have an authorization, like I have an authorization for Broward Sheriff's Office, it doesn't mean that I can go to Chicago and do what I do in Chicago. If I'm certified, that means that I've met at least the base knowledge and practical knowledge to be able to do the examination as tested by an outside agency.
So, Mr. Bello, if you go and complete an armorer's course at 6 Hour, at Taurus, at Glock, are they certifying you that you are an expert in their firearms?
They're saying you're an armorer in their firearms. So once you've completed an armorer's course, let's say for Glock, then they give you a certificate saying that you're a Glock armorer. That certificate is typically valid for anywhere between 3 and 5 years, depending on the manufacturer. But once that time lapses, then Glock will no longer consider you an armorer for their firearm. And at that point, you'd have to go back and take another armorer's course for Glock to then be updated with all of the information, get a new certificate, and then you would be a Glock armorer again.
Okay. And so, Mr. Belli, you talked about the Association of Firearms and Tool Marks Examiners.
Mm-hmm.
Are you certified by that organization?
I am.
How long have you been certified by them?
I believe I was first certified in 2015, so maybe 7 years, more or less. 7 or 8 years.
Has that been continual since 2015?
Yes.
Do you have to take continuing education to maintain that certification?
Yes. So the original certification is a test. You take a written examination as well as a practical examination, and you have to pass. You leave a written examination, you have to pass.
Nah, man, I'm cool, y'all. Y'all know I'm a cool nigga, bro, but I don't like that rule shit. There's always somebody come in and telling somebody to shut up, or like, bro, watch how the fuck you talking, bro. Like, I don't even, then you coming in my shit, bro. Like, that's like me coming in your house and just kicking my muddy shoes all over your, like, and telling you what to do with your, bro. Shut your motherfucking ass up, bro. Real shit, nigga. And that's respectfully, nigga. Fuck wrong with some of these people, bro.
An 80% score, and then the practical exam is essentially 100% because you can't give a wrong answer, and so you have to have 100% on the practical. And then to maintain that certification, you have to attend training or give training, so a combination thereof, and that is to a minimum of 100 hours every 5 years.
And Mr. Belli, do you teach in the area of firearms and tool marks?
I do. I give workshops, and I also obviously train any examiners that are new examiners in the field of firearms and tool mark examiners.
Have you testified as an expert in court before?
Yes.
How many times?
Approximately, it's probably in the neighborhood of in the low 70s right now.
What jurisdictions have you testified in?
So I've testified in federal and state courts for Miami-Dade and the Broward counties.
And what specific areas of expertise have you opined on?
So I've been allowed to opine on firearms, firearm examination and comparison, tool mark examination and comparison, serial number restoration, and muzzle target distance determination.
Can it offer defense an opportunity for other expert qualifications? So, Mr. Bello, let's start and talk about what is the difference between ballistics and firearms.
So yeah, that's a commonly, I guess, misused phrase. I don't really work with what people would refer to as ballistics. So ballistics, as commonly used, is really speaking about external ballistics, and that's what happens to a projectile in flight. So from the time it leaves the barrel to the time it impacts a target. The area of ballistics that I do work in is internal ballistics and terminal ballistics. So in that area, that would be more synonymous with firearm examination, in that internal ballistics is what happens to a projectile and casing inside of a firearm, and then the terminal ballistics is what happens to that projectile after impacting an object.
So, terminal, like airport terminal?
Terminal's final, so the final destination, final endpoint of the projectile.
With regards to the internal ballistics, explain what causes there to be in what is internal ballistics.
Sure, so like the mechanics of discharging?
Please.
So the mechanics of discharging a firearm essentially is there's a firing sequence that occurs. Typically that firing sequence involves the firearm is loaded and ready to be fired. So with most modern firearms, at that point you could pull the trigger. The trigger will release the hammer or the striker, which will detonate the firing pin. Detonate the primer. The primer of a cartridge is what holds a small explosive that ignites the powder inside the cartridge. That powder then expands through combustion and pushes a projectile through the barrel, and then at the same time, it will push the cartridge case rearward into the firearm itself. That rearward force is what causes the firearm to cycle. So at that point, the casing will be extracted and ejected, typically to the right and rear of where someone will be standing who's discharging the firearm. And then the cycle at that point starts all over again. So the slide comes forward, picking up another live cartridge, and you can then pull the fire,
Okay, lots of
trigger.
definitions, big words that are not necessarily common in everyday
Sure.
life, so let's go back a little bit. A live cartridge,
Mhm.
what is that?
I have a demonstrative I can show the jury.
Please, depends how you see it.
No,
Okay, so if you could explain what is a live cartridge.
May I approach the jury to show them?
Please stand up.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, this is a demonstrative exhibit, it's not in evidence.
Yeah, it's not a live cartridge or anything, it's just plastic. So, a live cartridge is essentially what you see here. So it's a projectile or a bullet, a cartridge case, the primer, and then inside is where the powder itself is housed. So if you can see at the bottom of the cartridge case, there's a hole. That's called the flash hole. So when the primer is struck by the firing pin, the force is what causes that powder to ignite. So the explosion that's inside of the primer is going to come through that flash hole and into the main body of the cartridge case, igniting the powder. When that powder is lit, the projectile leaves the cartridge, entering the barrel of the firearm, and then the cartridge travels rearward and exits the firearm in a semi-automatic firearm. The marks that you see on now a fired projectile are the marks that can be imparted by rifling. So by the rifling in a barrel, those are the raised areas of the barrel that impart spin on a projectile. That's their whole purpose, is to actually impart spin on the projectile. The spin stabilizes the projectile in flight, so it makes it more accurate for the shooters. There's different types of rifling, but they all leave some kind of mark or another on projectiles. The cartridge cases will receive several different marks. So the mark that's in the center is the firing pin impression. The marks that are around it, in this case, looks almost like a rectangle. That's the firing pin aperture impression. And then the parallel striations that you can see, that's from the breech face. There are also this little triangular mark. That's the ejector mark. And then it can receive an extractor mark, which is this kind of striated scratches that you see there. And that's from, all of those parts are from the firing of this cartridge.
Okay, well again, a lot of terms and things that people
Yeah.
don't deal with on a regular basis. Let's start with, and help make sure it's clear and defined,
Sure.
what the parts of a firearm are.
Okay.
Are there different classes of firearms?
There are several different classes of firearms. So for handguns, the most common classes of firearms are revolvers and pistols, or semi-automatic pistols.
And can you tell the jury, the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the difference between what is a revolver and a semi-automatic?
So yeah, they basically using him to let the jury understand, or to get the jury to understand basically what is a gun. I know it sounds crazy as a motherfucker, but a lot of times they use these people just to, like I said, make the jury or whether it's the judge or whoever, to make them understand more of what's, even though everybody know the fuck a gun is, and most people know how the fuck a gun, is shot and how the barrel spin, but everybody don't know. So this ain't really gonna be no super damning witness evidence type shit. Everybody already know this shit.
So the main difference between a revolver and a semi-automatic firearm is that a revolver will have a set of chambers, and that's where these live cartridges are loaded. And then upon firing, the firearm will cycle itself, rotating that cylinder, but the cartridges do not eject. Right? The cartridges in a revolver have to be manually ejected. So they won't typically leave fired casings at a crime scene. Whereas semi-automatic firearms will automatically extract and eject fire casing every time that you pull the trigger.
So your remaining approach?
Right.
I have a demonstrative fake firearm. You should be so kind as to double check and
Sure.
make sure on that.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, just remember with the demonstratives, they're not in evidence. witness in explaining or illustrating his testimony. Help him explain it, but the evidence is the testimony of the witness. These demonstratives, unless they are later received in evidence, do not go back to the jury room during deliberations.
Is the item that you have in front of you
I don't know. I'm gonna tell you this though. The way that nigga Melly blowing kisses and all that shit. Who was that asked me that? 2 Cents. I don't know. The way he looking comfortable. I'm going off how Melly looking. I'm going off the evidence. So I ain't really. I don't know. He seemed comfortable to me. You feel me? I ain't never seen a nigga more comfortable. I ain't gonna lie. On a double murder trial, I ain't never seen it.
replica or plastic firearm?
Yes.
Does it shoot any projectiles?
No, it doesn't have a barrel or any. You can see that the barrel itself is plugged, so there's nothing that could possibly come out of this firearm.
Does it have a trigger that can be pulled?
No, it does not.
No. Does it have a slide or a magazine that can be moved?
It has a magazine that can be extracted, but the slide cannot be moved. The hammer cannot be cocked. So there's no, in this particular design, the only moving part is the magazine release, which ejects the plastic magazine.
Okay. So can you now use that, and if I can have the witness step down so we can put it on the screen to make it easier for the jurors to see. Mr. Bello, if you would be so kind. And so we have the green screen there to the right. If you could now slowly, in terms of describing the areas on a typical semi-automatic firearm.
Sure. So in this particular design semi-automatic firearm, the area that you pull to fire is the trigger. That's this plastic area right here. This particular firearm has a manual safety. That's this device here. It's ambidextrous, so it should have its equal partner here. So what that means is that whether you're left-handed or right-handed, you can shoot it either way and activate the safety or deactivate the safety. On this side of the firearm, you can see that there's a slide catch. That's what this part of the firearm is.
What does the slide catch do?
It catches the slide. In firearms, you'll notice that our terminology is very self-explanatory. We like to keep it simple. And so this part here is the slide. That's the part that will travel rearward and extract a casing from this area here. That is the chamber. And on its rearward travel, it'll pick up a casing from that chamber, extracting and ejecting it. When it's empty, there's a spring inside the magazine that pushes the slide up automatically, and it'll catch the slide. That just lets the person who's shooting know the firearm is empty. You can insert another magazine and start to shoot again. And then this portion here is the barrel. In this case, it's an exposed barrel. Not every firearm has an exposed barrel, so sometimes the slide covers this area as well. And then this is the muzzle end of the barrel. So this is the portion of the barrel where the projectile itself travels out of. And I guess just to clarify also, the projectile is not the only thing that comes out of the barrel of a firearm. There are byproducts of discharge. And so...
We'll get back to that
Yep.
in a second. So can you demonstrate and show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury about how you would insert a standard magazine using that demonstrative?
Sure. So in this particular firearm, you would just insert the magazine with the feed ramp of the magazine facing that direction. You just insert it into the well until it clicks in place, and at that point, slide up a little more. The magazine will sit flush with the bottom of the firearm, and the magazine is inserted. In regular function, at this point, typically the slide is to the rear of the firearm, and you would pull it back, and that would automatically release it to move forward and pick up a live cartridge and be in battery, which essentially just means that it's loaded and ready to fire.
Okay. So you discussed rifling.
Yes.
Where on this gun does the rifling come from?
So the rifling is from the barrel, so it's from this portion here. The chamber of this firearm ends right around here, and so from that portion forward is where the rifling will be present on the barrel of the firearm.
And explain what is rifling.
So rifling are raised portions of the inside of the barrel, which are designed to impart spin to the projectile, stabilizing the projectile in flight
and making the firearm itself more accurate.
Are those markings, the high and low points, standard in different firearms?
Yes, so there are characteristics that manufacturers will place on firearms. One of them is the width and number and direction of twist. So the width of lane impressions, so how wide each of those marks is inside the barrel, is standardized, as well as the number, so whether it's 6 or 5, 3 or whatever that number might be, and the direction they twist the projectile in, so whether they twist right or left, are all purposely put in by the manufacturer.
Do different manufacturers have trademarked or patented rifling patterns?
They do. So, like Glock has kind of a, Glock and Smith & Wesson are famously involved for, I guess Smith & Wesson tried to make a replica of what Glock has years ago, and Glock sued them, and they won the lawsuit, so Smith & Wesson had to immediately stop manufacturing the firearm the way they were manufacturing it. And it really came down to some of those class characters.
Yo, I did not know that Smith & Wesson made a fake Glock, yo. What was the name of that gun? Does anybody know the name of the Smith & Wesson Glock gun? That's crazy. I wanted, and they sued them? I didn't know that.
Characteristics that we were talking about, so the marks that were inside the firearm, not really how it looked. So the firearm still looks the same as a Glock, but the inside markings are different than Glock, and they had to make them different because of the lawsuit.
So with regard, you said class characteristics, that's the type of firearm. How would you say that's different from individual characteristics of a specific firearm?
So class characteristics are those characteristics that are put in place by the firearm manufacturer on purpose. They know they're putting them in there, they chose to put them in there. So that's the caliber, the shape of the firing pin, the shape of the firing pin aperture, the number of lanes and grooves in a barrel, the direction of the twist. Those are all on purpose. They decided those numbers, and that's what they are making them all with. So every Taurus pistol, which this is basically a replica of, is a Taurus PT92. So every Taurus pistol will have 6 land impressions. They all twist to the right. They all have a hemispherical firing pin. They all have a circular firing pin aperture. Now, the individual marks are the marks that the tooling puts in incidental to manufacture. So basically, they're accidental marks. Manufacturer doesn't know they're being imparted. They don't mean for them to be imparted. They just happen by the mechanical action of making the parts. So the cutting tools or the forming tools that are used to make the barrel, to make the slide, to make the aperture, all leave marks.
Oh, a SIG? Is it a SIG?
Which are microscopic in nature on these different parts.
Stop sliding for you. And so before I have you resume your seat, could you show where would the ejector marks be made on this particular?
So I can't open the firearm, and that's where the ejector would be, but if looking at it from this angle, the extractor is on this side of the firearm. It's a hook that's put in place right here in the slide, and then the ejector is on the opposite side. So if you could think of opposing forces, the hook has to grab the casing and pull it out. The ejector has to push the casing from the opposite side of the extractor and push it out of the firearm. So the ejector is typically placed in here, attached to the slide itself, or attached to the frame of the firearm, but protruding through the slide.
And so, Mr. Bell, if you'd be so kind as to resume your seat.
Can we take the phone back?
You can, yeah.
Hey, y'all, I wanted to ask y'all this, too. Is Ynw MELLY still signed? Is he still signed, or did he get dropped? Like, who putting up all this money for him? Is it the label, or for all these years? I don't know. I didn't know if he was still signed or what.
Yes, that would be good. Okay, so still a lot of definitions. I want to make sure we understand. You talked about lands.
Yes.
LANDS. What is a land?
So a land inside of the barrel of a firearm is the raised area. So that's the actual area that's left inside of the firearm that impacts the projectiles. So that's the area that's going to leave those scratches that I showed you earlier. The opposing
I'm about to cut my motherfucking what's the name off. I ain't gonna lie. Let me see something. Let me deactivate my what's the name and see if it runs smoother. Y'all should be able to still hear me, right?
areas are the grooves. So in cutting methods, the grooves are the raised areas on the projectile, and they're the lower areas on the firearm. So these are the areas that typically are cut away by another tool inside of the barrel. Usually when we're looking at projectiles, examiners look at the land impressed areas, not as much the groove impressed areas, only because we have found some repetition in the groove areas from different manufacturing methods. And so in order to avoid any possible confusion as to whether or not it came from a particular firearm, we look at areas we know are individual, which are the land impressed areas.
So in that, you're just talking about the lands on the projectiles.
Correct.
Are there any lands and grooves on the casings?
No, there are no lands and grooves on casings.
Is there a database or some sort of literature that tells you which manufacturers use 7 lands or which use 3?
Yes, so the FBI years ago compiled a database that they call the the gun reference database. And so basically that database has a list of manufacturers and what their specific numbers would be as far as direction of twist, number of landing grooves, and the width of the landing groove. And so with the width, whenever we try to use that database, we try to add a little bit more to the width of the land impressions that we're measuring, only so that it becomes a more comprehensive list than a more restrictive list. So if we're going to make an error, we want to make sure we're more inclusive in this error than exclusive.
Okay. So you also talked about firing pins.
Mm-hmm.
Is there just one type of firing pin?
No, there are several different types and shapes of firing pins. So your typical firing pins that you're going to observe in firearms are hemispherical. I'd say that's the majority of them that we're going to see. Hemispherical just means kind of rounded in nature as far as the tip of the firing pin. But they also have firing pins that are elliptical in shape. A lot of examiners call them Glock shape because Glock was one of the first manufacturers to use this elliptical shape on the firing pin. There's also rectangular firing pins, although not super common, or certainly they were more common in the 80s and 90s than they are today. But they still are some manufacturers that use rectangular or square firing pins. And then you have rim-fire firing pins, which can be square, rectangular, or circular as well. And so there are different categories of firing pins, absolutely.
When you talk about the firing pin, is the front of it flat, or is there a difference in the geometry?
Shout out everybody that chin that, man. I don't know, bro. I tried to I don't know. Jason, what's good, bro? I'm right here. I'm trying to stop the lag, bro. I don't know why the lag is so heavy, bro. Like, I don't get it, gang. What the fuck? I ain't got no drop frames. It says 0 drop frames down there. Like, why is it lagging for, bro? Ethernet cord plugged in. That should be getting on my nerves, like, majorly. I'm gonna hang in there, though. Shout out to everybody that's in here rocking with me. Shit, y'all know, I don't know what, I got to do some more research on this shit, bro.
Of the front of the firing pin.
So the tip of the firing pin, which is typically what we're going to be examining, are
Smash
different
that light,
geometries.
nigga.
So that's that shape that I was referencing. It can either be hemispherical, which has that almost like, you know, if you think about a globe, it has that rounded shape to it. That's essentially the type of shape that we're looking at in a hemispherical firing pin. Elliptical is an ellipse, so it's an area where the very tip is pointed, but the edges of that are like an ellipse, so it's more oval in shape. Square firing pins are squared, and then there are also cylindrical firing pins, which is a cross between some of them, so they're circular in shape, but the very tip is cut off, so it's flat. So it depends on the shape of the firing pin, but there are different geometries to the firing pins.
Okay. And would that be a class or individual characteristic, the shape of the firing pin?
The overall shape is a class characteristic, so that's something that the manufacturer decides before they even start manufacturing.
What about, are there individual characteristics as to firing pins?
Yes, there are individual characteristics observed in firing pins. Those are going to depend on the manufacturing method. So there are firing pins which are manufactured using a MIM process. That's a metal injection molding process. And those firing pins have individual characteristics from the expansion and cooling of the metal. So metal will expand when it's heated, and then when it cools, it shrinks back down. And in that process of expanding and shrinking, there are air bubbles that are formed inside of the metal itself. Those air bubbles can reach the surface of the tip of the firing pin, but when and where they reach, it's random. So
You say you can send me your StreamYard? What you mean by that? I got StreamYards already. It's not that. I don't know what it is, bro, but it didn't always do that, my nigga. It didn't always do this. I swear to God, if you've been watching me for a minute, this shit, I think it's an outside issue. I ain't gonna lie, because last time the cable man, he said some fucking, I don't know if it was possums, rats. He said some shit was eating through the wire outside. Like one time my shit had went off and I paid my bill, and I knew, I'm like, it had me tripping, because I'm like, nigga, I paid my bill. I knew I paid my bill. But he said the motherfuckers was eating through the line or some kind of animal. I don't know, I can't remember what he said, but I remember he said it was like a rodent eating through the fucking lines, you know what I'm saying? The lines outside, not the, because I got the fastest internet, that's what I'm saying. Maybe they lied to me, but it wasn't always doing this, bro. But shout out to everybody, we gonna just thug it through, I guess. I'm gonna try to come up with something. I might have to refresh in a minute, so.
manufacturer can't really control that part. And then manufacturers, after those processes, or after the initial manufacturing process, then take those parts and polish them. And so the polishing also adds on some individual characteristics that can be observed in firing pins.
What about wear and tear and use of the firearm?
Sure, so if you're using the firearm, over time, the metal in the firing pins, depending on how it was made, can become very brittle. And sometimes they can fracture, sometimes they can break, sometimes the whole tip of the firing pin will fall off, making the firearm inoperable. So depending on how much wear and tear, it can certainly cause additional individual characteristics to appear.
Is there a level of maintenance that you have to do on a firearm?
Yes.
What would that be?
So depending on the different manufacturer, they're going to recommend a few different oiling points. But cleaning and oiling a firearm after every time it's fired is recommended by every manufacturer. And so the minimum that they recommend to do is to field strip the firearm, which means to take off the slide and the barrel, and then grease the rails that the slide sits on so that it can travel smoothly, and then also to grease the ramps that feed the cartridge into the chamber, which is part of the barrels themselves. So there are greasing points within the firearm that every manufacturer is going to recommend. They also recommend to clean the firearm, and specifically the barrel of the firearm, after each time it's fired, because every time you discharge a firearm, there's powder, there's primer residues, and there's lead from the actual discharge that can accumulate inside of that muzzle or inside of the barrel of the firearm itself. So if you don't clean that out, what can happen over time is that buildup inside of the firearm will actually fill in the
y'all, I'm trying to figure this. I'm about to go on Reddit, man. So I'm trying to figure out why this shit keep doing that, bro.
area, and then you see some of those lines continue onto these, so that's what these scratches are, and then this area out here as well.
Okay. And what are the breech face markings caused by?
So that's actually caused by the area of the slide that the cartridge case is impacting against.
And is that an individual characteristic of the firearm or a class characteristic?
So with breech face marks, you have a combination of both. The class characteristic is the overall design. And what I mean by design is, in this case, you have lines that run parallel to each other. That parallel marking is a class characteristic. And it's characteristic of the tool that they use in order to cut that shape. In this case, it's a broach. So it's a cutting tool that they run down the face of the breech face, and it leaves these parallel lines. What's individual is the spacing between one and the other, as well as when one starts and finishes, and when and how they're oriented with each other. So those are the individual aspects of those marks. So you have a combination of both in breach marks.
No. And so it's clear for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury when you're looking here, which is the firing pin impression.
So the firing pin impression is actually this mark right here. So it's in this particular case, it looks like a circular mark. What would be more characteristic is if this was more oblong, kind of like that. That would be characteristic of a Glock. But in this particular case, it's this circular or hemispherical shape in the middle of the primer.
And then the kind of little underneath, the little
Yeah,
hole
so
almost looking.
this little divot here is firing pin drag. So in short recoil operated firearms, which essentially just means that the firearm itself is operating using the force of the recoil. There is a locking mechanism, and different manufacturers have different locking mechanisms, but in this particular case, it's basically a cam. So before the firearm will travel, or the slide of the firearm will travel rearward, it has to cam down. When it cams down, it leaves this impression of scratches, which is from the movement of the firing pin itself, dropping down and hitting the primer during that unlocking process.
And you also mentioned extractor marks.
Mm-hmm.
Is that demonstrated on this area here?
Yes, so the extractor marks are here.
This nigga they're not about to break down the definition of a bullet. Basically, this nigga, I mean, are they you know what they doing? They doing that shit again, bro. Yeah, fuck all that. Fuck that shit. This shit got this shit lagging and shit. Let's move up, man. Shout out to everybody in the chat, man, please. Yeah, slime. We're gonna do it on break when they go on lunch. They about to go on lunch break right now. Are they? They might be on lunch break. Damn, they still got this nigga in the chair. Nah, we gonna scoot up. Yeah, they dragging it. They trying to wear down the jury, bro, with this fucking. Bro, alright. We believe it's a bullet. It was a real bullet. We believe y'all. The people are actually dead. Like, rest in peace, young YNW Juvie and I don't like that shit, bro. That's how they did with that black lady this the first day, the end of the first day, bro. God damn, nigga. Can we get some more witnesses or something? They trying to wear down the jury, you know what I mean? But yeah, we
firearms, which they bought the patent from Beretta to manufacture. Beretta makes what they call Beretta 92, Beretta 92 FS, and so Taurus replicates that in their PT 92 and PT 99. So those are the two variants of that particular pistol. There really isn't, and the 9 designates the 9mm caliber. So PT 92 and PT 99 are 9mm variants of that Beretta replicant that they have.
Okay, and that's actually the red gun in front of you. Is it a PT 92 replica?
Correct. So this is exactly what you would see if you saw a Beretta or a Taurus, whether it's a 92 or PT 92. They look the same. If I held it from over here and I had a Beretta or a Taurus, you wouldn't know the difference between one and the other.
Okay. And that was which caliber for the 92?
So the 92 is a 9mm firearm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a 40 caliber that may be closely named to that?
So Taurus does make a 40 caliber. They make it under the model name PT 100, PT 101.
In terms of the list of firearms that are potential, are some more common than others that you see in the lab?
Yes, certainly.
Would that help you in doing a distance determination?
No, again, because it doesn't tell me which one of their models.
Good looking, broski. We gonna try that shit on lunch break. We almost at lunch break now. Almost at lunch break. We almost at lunch break. We are almost at the lunch break. I took that motherfucking Ethernet. I'm trying to see if the Wi-Fi make it do something.
Entered into evidence as states 43.
Okay.
Do you recognize that exhibit?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize that?
So my initials on the paper bag and the date that I started the examination, as well as my initials and the date that I finished the examination on the seals.
Okay. If I may have that back so I can put it up on the screen so it's clear to everybody what we're talking about when we're talking about Exhibit 13.
The hell is that? My bag is that?
When you're talking about Exhibit 13,
Oh, that's the.
these white labels here on the back, did you place those on there?
Yes. I
Good.
did.
And if you'd be so kind as to, do you know how to hit erase on the screen?
Is there just erase everything?
Or clear?
There we go.
Thank you.
Yep.
So Exhibit 13 labeled G115. Where does the G115 come from?
So the G115 is the external identifier, so that's whatever the person who impounded the evidence itself labeled it.
Okay.
Typically, that's given to us in the form of a property receipt.
Is that
So,
the 115, the number that's there, is that
Yeah.
the same? So on Exhibit 13, there's also a case number under there. What is that case number?
so that should be the lab number that's assigned again by the lab. So that 1813127, that's the number that's generated by our information management system. Every case that comes to us has to have a unique identifier, and because we're a county lab, we service a lot of different municipalities. We can't guarantee that their numbers won't overlap, but as a lab, we still have to have unique identifiers. And so the system, regardless as to what their identifier is, which in this case was the one below that, at least according to our information management system, we have to have that unique identifier put in place by the laboratory. And so that in this case, it was 1813127.
And is that the same for all the disciplines the lab covers?
Yes, so it should be. There are cases where sometimes an exhibit might be submitted and either they thought it was affiliated with a different case or something like that, and they gave it a separate lab number. So you might have a separate unique lab number, but you can't have two cases under the same lab number.
Understood. So going to Exhibit 13, you describe to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you do to analyze Exhibit 13.
So for pretty much any exhibit, the first step I'm going to do is to try to see that whatever I received in evidence is what I'm supposed to have. With fire cartridge cases and projectiles, it's a little bit more difficult just because, as you can see in this case, they're submitted in a brown paper bag or a sealed manila envelope. That's the typical kind of submission for casings and projectiles. So I'll try to feel the evidence and see, okay, this is a bag, it says it has 3 projectiles. Does it have what feels like 3 projectiles? Or does it have a magazine? Or does it have light ammunition? So if I can feel that difference, then I'll stop there and say, okay, whoever submitted this has to make some kind of correction because they're telling me they submitted 3 projectiles, but that's not what I have. In this case, that wasn't the case. It said I had 3 projectiles inside this package, and I had 3 projectiles. So then I open the packaging, and I start to describe what I have in front of me. In this particular case, it was 3 fire projectiles, and so I describe them as 3 fire projectiles. If there are cartridge cases, then I'll describe them as 1 fired 40 Smith & Wesson Blazer cartridge case. And that'll be the description for each of the cartridge cases, which is just the caliber, manufacturer, and whether or not it was fired or live.
Okay, so on item that your lab number assigned 13, that is the G115 identifier. Do you know?
Shout out to my boy. Shout out to Catnip for Life, man. Norway. Shout out to my Norwegians, man. You know what I'm saying? My Norwegians, man. I'm good. I'm over here. Can't trust that next witness, please. Right? Like, oh my God. I think we about to. It's almost 12, so it's gonna be lunch break like any minute now. But I'm just trying to figure out this lagging shit. My shit done started back lagging. I gotta figure this shit out because I don't know why it's doing this, bro. You feel me? But shout out to everybody that's pulling up, real talk. I see the Wi-Fi only worked for a little bit, right? That shit was only clear for a little bit. That shit crazy. We're gonna figure it out.
You know where that came from?
A very, very rare case.
They just gonna get this nigga to explain to us that that's a gun and that's what a gun shoots people and bro, god damn, bro, we know what like fuck. Show a video, nigga. I'll be the court like show us a video or something, bro, because your ass.
You say 40 caliber. Does that translate to millimeters, inches, some other specialty?
So 40 caliber is actually in inches. It has a synonym in metric, so it has a 10 millimeter synonym. So 40 caliber is if I took the widest portion of the projectile itself, it would measure 0.4 inches from one side to the other. If I changed it to metric, it should measure about 10 millimeters from one side to the other.
Okay. How do you know the difference in tell between a 40 caliber and a 10 millimeter? If they're equal.
So the projectile itself really can't tell me the difference. So when we list them as a 40 caliber as opposed to 40 Smith & Wesson. But 40 Smith & Wesson is also a much more popular cartridge. For every, I can't tell you the last time I saw a 10 millimeter auto in the lab. I think probably for every 5 years we might see 1 or 2 10 millimeter autos, whereas we'll see a 40 Smith & Wesson almost daily coming to the lab. So just the difference in popularity of the two is what's going to push it towards being a 40 Smith & Wesson versus a 10 millimeter.
So when you're looking at the projectile, how do you take into account any deformities from hitting intervening objects or the rifling on the barrel? How do you measure and still take those into account?
Sure. So when I'm looking at the worksheet, one of the portions of the worksheet we use to describe the physical evidence we have. That's especially true and important for projectiles. We can get projectiles that are relatively pristine, but that's not the norm. Most projectiles that we receive in evidence, whether they hit a person or they hit a car or they hit a tree, are deformed from hitting something. And so it's very important for us to describe what damage we're seeing on the projectiles for a variety of reasons. One of them being that if I can't measure the exact diameter of the base, I need to know why I couldn't measure the exact diameter of the base. So is it because the base is missing? Or is it because it's just deformed, it's pancaked, it's flattened out, so I can't get an accurate measurement? And so that's one part of it. The other part of it is I do look for the class characteristics of the number of land impressions. If the damage is that half of the projectile is missing, and I have 2 land impressions, well, I don't know, did it have 6 land impressions total? Did it have 5 land impressions total, and I only have 2 left? And so at that point, if I'm missing that information, I can't determine whether or not the class characteristics really line up until I take it to a microscope and start measuring the width of the land impressions and determine that, okay, if the width of the land impressions are this, then it has to be 6 land impressions. Or if it's a larger land impression, then it has to be 5 land impressions. So all of those characteristics are notated in our notes page for those different reasons.
Can you look at shrapnel, or tiny, tiny pieces of a projectile and get those land and groove impressions?
Depending what's there, we could. So if, let's say, the jacket that's on here peeled off, and now instead of having 1 jacket, I end up having 5 or 6 fragments of a jacket. I can look at those fragments and see if there is a land impression present, or if there's a partial land impression present. That won't let me know the class characteristics of the firearm, but if there's enough information...
Hey, the lawyer and that bitch yawning too. Your lawyer and that bitch like, God damn, can we go to lunch, God damn it?
That land...
Ynw MELLY ass over there writing a song. The female lawyer, she look like she in her damn phone. She on Instagram. Next witness, please. Like NBA said,
impression that's present, I could make a comparison to other projectiles. So depending on how much is left of those fragments, I can.
trying to fix this slag.
If the jacket came off of a core, right? So like the inside of this projectile that would have been lead, that core doesn't actually impact the firearm itself, right? It's covered by the jacket. So that core doesn't have any information that I can use to then make comparisons. So if it's just a lead core, there's nothing that I can do with that. Apart from maybe say it could have come from a 40 Smith & Wesson or it could have come from a 9mm. But that's about as far as I can go with that examination because there are no class characteristic or individual characteristics present on that from the firearm.
Okay. So staying on Exhibit 13, was there a number of lands and grooves on Exhibit 13?
Yes. So Exhibit 13 had 6 landing grooves.
Okay. Did it have a direction of twist you were able to document?
Yes, it was right-handed twist.
Okay. Did it have a bullet weight?
Yes, so the overall weight of that projectile was 179.4 grains.
179.4 grains. Okay. What is a cannelore?
So a cannelore is a
Bro. Jeez.
they kind of have the inside of the that are visible on.
Yo. They really gonna wear the jury down with this shit. Them prosecutors something else, bro. Smash that like button one time, y'all. I'm trying to fix the lag. I'm gonna on lunch break. I'm gonna fix the lag, so we'll have it resolved by the time we get back. But
On the projectiles that come from polygonal barrels.
polygamy.
Barrels are commonly used in what type
This
of
nigga that said polygamy.
manufacturers?
Listen, this nigga talking about polygamy. Yeah, man, for if a woman and a man. What the fuck? Nigga snap out of the courtroom. What the hell is he? Nigga about to... Yeah, you know, polygamy, this nigga, they just saying anything at this point. God damn. I'm just waiting for them to say, when a bullet hits somebody, is it possible that they can die? I'm waiting for them to say some old basic ass shit like that, bro.
Additional defects or anything as to Exhibit 13?
Yes, I do.
What do you document?
So additionally to what we've already discussed, I'll document the packaging, so how exactly it was submitted. You can see that the external package is a brown paper bag, but inside of that, most agencies will have some kind of sub-packaging that will separate the individual items in the bag. So in this case, it was submitted inside of a small tin can, inside of a brown paper bag.
So I'm going to go ahead and
No
publish
gun case closed.
your Exhibit 13, which is part of States 43. Do you additionally, when you are labeling them, sub-label the item inside as well, or do you rely upon?
The tin might have either my handwriting or the label on it.
Okay.
Can we go to lunch, Judge?
So is that your label?
Yes.
Okay.
That's it.
The handwriting here, the number 7 projectile rear passenger floorboard 1824. Is that you?
No.
So when you're talking about the nose
Mhm.
of the bullet, can you show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you mean by the nose of the bullet?
Yeah, so the nose of the bullet would be this area right here. And then this is the base of the bullet itself. And then this is the land impression, or one of the land impressions. And you can see that from the base to the nose, it is slanted right, if I were to make the base flat. And so it has that right hand twist.
And when you measure the lands and grooves, do you document those measurements?
I do.
Why do you do that?
So the primary purpose for that is, again, to see the class characteristics, so the width of the lanes and the grooves. If there is a significant difference between those numbers, in between two projectiles, then that would preclude it from having been fired in the same firearm. And then additionally, I can take those numbers and put them into the general rifling characteristics database and see if there's any suspect weapons that have those same measurements.
Okay. So I'm going to move on now to Exhibit 14 and the same, your Exhibit 14. Is that your label that's placed on there?
Yes.
What description did you have as to the G number for Exhibit 14?
116.
And this number 24 projectile front driver's side floor under brake pedal 1846. Is that your handwriting?
No.
Okay. So looking at your Exhibit 14, G116, I want to go through those same questions again. What was the measurable caliber of that item?
So the caliber measured to be .401.
And how does that compare to the last one?
It's very similar. I mean, a slight difference. The other one, I believe, measured at .400. So it's a difference of 1/1000th of an inch. That's within tolerances for the same caliber.
Okay. How many lands and grooves did you see on this particular one?
I saw at least 4 landing grooves that were present. The other 2 were either damaged or just not readily visible.
Okay. The bullet weight, what was this?
It was 167.4 grains.
What were the materials?
It was also copper and lead.
Any cannelure?
No.
Did you see cannelures on any of the projectiles here?
No.
The jacket type, what was it on Exhibit your 14?
It was also a full metal jacket, so it has that same characteristic where it has either a flat or a rounded nose and an open base where the base is exposed, the lead core is exposed.
So in here you said there was only 4 lands or grooves visible. How does that compare with the last one? That you said there were 6 lands and grooves.
So the last one had 6 landing grooves that were visible. These 4 landing grooves are visible just because of damage, so there are parts of the jacket that have been ripped off, likely due to passing through an object or impact. And so that's the only difference, really.
And you said passing through an object. You previously talked about going through glass. What other items would cause damage to a bullet?
Honestly, it could be almost anything. If it went through a body and hit bone, it could fragment. It could have the jacket peeled off. If it hit a car door, if it went through any kind of harder object. Most of these, not most, all projectiles really, are intended to enter an object that's mainly liquid, right? So whether it's us, a deer, or any animal, the primary composition of us is liquid. So apart from bone, there's really not anything that's hard inside of our bodies, just like any kind of animal. And so any impact with bone or hard object like bone would cause damage to the projectiles.
On Exhibit 14, were you able to determine a estimated original brain weight?
I believe it was, I left it as undetermined because enough of it was missing that I couldn't say 100%. Obviously, it has to have weight.
Hey, Catnip, that's my song, bro. Call it what you wanna call it. What you know about that exhibit in Alcoholics, man? You know about that, man? This nigga really. I guess they about to let this nigga finish describing his evidence, bro.
Barcode that's on all of these.
So it's a barcode that really our system itself puts in place, and that barcode just contains that.
Tell us about a fucking barcode. Is she serious? I feel like Melly and them with my hand up here, like, yo, this shit. Tell us about a barcode. on the fucking sticker of the.
Same information that's underneath. So if you were to scan that barcode, it would just give you its Exhibit 15, external ID, 117, case number, and lab number. So that's really all it is. It's just a replication of the below information in barcode format.
In terms of when you first get the evidence, when it's given to you, how do you retrieve it?
So I retrieve the evidence from a firearms vault. So the firearms unit actually houses all of its evidence inside of our own unit. We have a fairly large room that's secured by alarm and a vault door where all of the evidence is kept. When I'm going to work on a case,
she over there, she need a damn Red Bull. I need a Red Bull too. This lady just told this man, tell us what is the barcode. Everybody, any barcode is whatever it is. You can go to the store and buy some Skittles. When they scan the barcode, when they come in, it's just say Skittles. She said, how do you get the stuff? Motherfucker, she pick it up. I mean, he pick it up, bitch. They trying to wear down the jury with this one, bro.
Because I'm the supervisor, I also will assign myself the case. So I'll pull the evidence, I'll assign it, and then I go to the vault physically and I retrieve the evidence from our evidence vault.
Do you work on more than one case at a time?
I only ever have the evidence for one case open at one time. So one case open.
When you are finished with the items of evidence, where does it go back to?
So when I'm done with the evidence, it'll get sealed back up into the original packaging. If the original packaging is too damaged or something's off with it, then I'll create a new packaging for it. And then it'll be sent back to our central receiving, which then sends it back to whoever the submitting agency was.
Do you reseal it with evidence tape and your name and CCN?
Yes.
What is a CCN?
So CCN is just a badge number. It's an employee identification number.
Are you a sworn law enforcement officer?
No.
Okay. Are you a civilian employee of the sheriff's office?
Yes.
Okay. The large green sticker that's on these items, is that placed on by the lab as well?
Yes.
So going to item, your Exhibit 15, described as G117. Did you measure the caliber of this particular projectile?
Yes.
Okay. What was the measurable caliber?
So the caliber for that one measured to be .400 inches.
Okay, so that's the same as your Exhibit 13?
Yes.
On the number of lands and grooves, how many were there?
There were 6.
What was the direction of twist?
It was a right-handed twist.
Did you have a bullet weight you were able to determine?
It weighed 179.4 grams.
Was the materials able to be determined as to what this bullet was made of?
Yes, it was also made of copper and lead.
What type of jacket was it?
So like the other two, it was a full metal jacketed projectile.
Was it magnetic?
No.
Were you able to view all 6 lands and all 6 grooves?
Yes.
The rifling type, what was it?
It was also conventional.
Were you able to determine a probable grain weight of the original bullet, an estimate?
Yes, so this one was also 180 grams.
With that information, were you able to determine a potential caliber?
It was also 40 Smith & Wesson, yes.
The damage or anything to this projectile, what did you document?
That the nose was slightly flattened, and that there are parts where the copper jacket is missing. However, the projectile's base is in good condition.
Okay. Did you measure the lands and grooves on this one as well?
I did.
Were they consistent with the...
Man, shout out to everybody in the chat. Yo, I'm sorry that they got this dude on the stand forever, bro. Look at Melly. I feel like Melly right now, bro. I want to fix this lagging problem too. God damn, can we go to lunch, Judge? Fuck. Or get a new witness or something, because nigga.
2 separate submissions. Did you do a comparison between exhibits 13, 14, and 15?
I did.
And how did you do that comparison?
Yeah.
So once I did the work...
And sir, are you also a human as well? Yes, I am a human. Were you born on planet Earth? As a matter of fact, I was, but they asking fucking retarded. It's clear that they trying to drag the fucking jury with this dumb ass, long, drawn out. She said, what does a barcode mean? Then she said, how do you go get this shit after he already said where does it go when it's done? What the fuck do this guy do?
sheets, and I saw that none of the evidence really could have been precluded from being fired in the same firearm based on just the class characteristics that were observed. I took the projectiles to the comparison microscope, and I looked at them underneath the comparison microscope.
So going back to the first photo we looked at earlier, at the bottom it says Exhibit 13 and 15.
Correct.
What does that indicate to you that these are showing photos of?
So that projectile or exhibit 13 is on the left stage, so on the left side of the microscope, and exhibit 15 is the projectile that's on the right side of the microscope.
Were you able to come to a conclusion as to whether or not they were fired in the same firearm?
And yes, there was sufficient agreement of individual characteristics to say that both of these projectiles came from the same firearm.
Now, see, that's a decent question right there. Did both of these fucking things come from the same gun? What the fuck?
So I want to make sure we're clear. Were the class characteristics the same?
They were.
How does the class characteristics being the same, is that enough for you to say an individualized, that they are a match from the same firearm?
No, it doesn't.
So explain the individual characteristics.
Right,
that
so-
you were able to show.
The class characteristics, like we talked about earlier, was the caliber, the number of lancing grooves, the width of a lancing groove. So the measurement from this black line to this line down here needs to be consistent. And obviously, if you can imagine that this is the impression that's coming from the barrel of the firearm, if this impression is all the way out to here, then that's a different firearm. There's no way that they could have come from the same firearm. So once all of those class characteristics agree, then I can say, okay, well, they came from the same type of firearm at least. Let's find out whether or not they came from the same firearm. Then what I'm looking for is all of these scratches that are in here. So this individual detail that comes from the manufacturing process of that land impression. So that's the area that is raised inside the barrel of the firearm that leaves this recessed area in the projectile. And the agreement of all of these different little scratches that you can see is the agreement that I'm looking for to determine whether or not they did come from the same firearm.
Mr. Bello, does the magazine being different or changed in any way alter the way a firearm operates?
No, not typically. So as long as the magazine is a functioning magazine, so it still has a spring inside of it, it still has its floor plate, feed ram, then as long as the magazine fits in that firearm, you can use any magazine that would fit in that firearm.
And there are magazines that come standard with the firearms?
Yes, there
Are
are.
there aftermarket magazines that are available as well?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any way to tell from the projectile what type of magazine it was loaded in?
No, there's really no way to know what magazine it came from.
Is there a way to know from the casing what type of magazine it was loaded in?
Not the type of magazine. Sometimes the magazine can leave marks on casings. So sometimes it could be possible to compare marks from known replicas of a magazine to unknowns. But again, that is sometimes, that's not all the time. And so there's really not a way to know, in the absence of a magazine or the absence of a firearm, there's really no way to know which magazine it came from or what type of magazine it came from.
So we talked about Exhibit 14, which was the G116.
Yep.
Were you able to do the same examination and say that Exhibit 14 came from the same firearm as 13 and 15?
So Exhibit 14 had similar class characteristics. The weight could have put it in the .40 caliber class. The width from that line to that line was very similar to these two exhibits, but there wasn't enough detail present. So these lines that I'm looking at in here didn't reproduce well on this other projectile. So in the absence of information, I can't eliminate it as having been fired from the same firearm, because sometimes firearms can mark slightly different, and so the absence